All right, guys, welcome back. Here we go again with a book review, Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams, written by Mathew Walker. Now, I'm only going to review about the first half of this book because it is so detailed and actually quite lengthy. Every page has a lot of words, not very big words. It's over 300 pages of very dense information on sleep. So I'm gonna break it out. This is going to be at least a two-part review, but this book, man, I'm not that far in, and it is intriguing. I'm gonna kick it off here with a little question, then leave you hanging for the end. But he says, "What if a similar opportunity was possible with sleep and memory as like ordering from a restaurant?" He says, "Before going to bed, you would review the learning experiences of the day, selecting only those memories from the menu list that you would like to improve." It's like, what if that was a reality? And he talks about where they're at with that. It's freaking insane. So jumping back to the first of the book here, kick it off with a bit of kind of a general statement here that gives you an idea of how important sleep actually is to the various aspects of your health. He says, "I doubt you are surprised by this fact, but you may be surprised by the consequences. Routinely sleeping less than 6 hours a night weakens your immune system, substantially increasing your risk of certain forms of cancer. Insufficient sleep appears to be a key lifestyle factor linked to your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Inadequate sleep, even moderate reductions for just 1 week, disrupts blood sugar levels so profoundly that you would be classified as pre-diabetic. Short sleeping increases the likelihood of your coronary arteries becoming blocked and brittle, setting you on a path toward cardiovascular disease, stroke, and congestive heart failure. Fitting Charlotte Bronte's prophetic wisdom that a ruffled mind makes a restless pillow. Sleep disruption further contributes to all major psychiatric conditions, including depression, anxiety, and suicidality." Basically, sleep affects every system in your body. It's in our sleep that we actually trim out the toxins from our brain and things. So this is not only a very important work, but a very fascinating book. So, as always, I will jump into some of the reading sections and things. But first, I want to just say the first portion of the book, it kind of breaks down like what is sleep, some of the theories in sleep, some of the research of sleep of the past, some of the things that we've debunked or verified from, sort of past. He goes through other like species sleep patterns and NREM sleep versus REM sleep, and how essentially every mammal has REM sleep and NREM sleep, minus possibly like orcas and dolphins that live in the water. Everything that's on land does. They have NREM and REM sleep. He goes into the details of and differences of each of those, and also by age. So infants have far more like NREM sleep than REM, and then it starts shifting. And at various stages, it shifts. So like pre-puberty, and then like teenagers and adulthood, and then later in life, people's quality of sleep decreases over time, and that's not a indication that they don't need as much quality sleep, but rather maybe more disruptions from other things caused by aging, right? Weakening bladder and changing circadian rhythms and stuff. He goes into a lot of detail on circadian rhythms, so I'm actually going to mention that here in a bit. So let's jump in. So first of all, we're gonna go to a story he tells from Greece. Now, he talks about how there's a lot of evidence that shows that humans actually used to sleep in two phases, like mostly sleeping at night and then maybe a nice nap in the afternoon. and that they had this like biphasic sleep pattern, and that our modern world encourages, like, business and production during the day. We've sort of transitioned to a single period of sleep at night. But there are several countries across the world that still do this, right? So like I lived in Argentina for a long time, and they have a long siesta. And to me, it was frustrating, right? It's like, I want to go out and buy some food or some clothes or whatever at like 2:30, 3 p.m., but the world is shut down. Nobody's open. And everyone's home sleeping after a big giant lunch. And he talks about in Greece, they had the siesta going on, and then due to some pressures from like travel and economic pressure, they basically were encouraged to stop the siesta, where they close shops and go take a nap, and to start working, right? He says, today, few of those signs remain in windows of shops. In Greece, the signs where they were closed for the siesta. Prior to the turn of the millennium, there was increasing pressure to abandon the siesta-like practice in Greece. A team of researchers from Harvard University School of Public Health decided to quantify the health consequences of this radical change in more than 23,000 Greek adults, which contained men and women ranging ages from 20 to 83 years old. The researchers focused on cardiovascular outcomes, tracking the group across a 6-year period as the siesta practice came to an end for many of them. As with countless Greek tragedies, and the end result was heartbreaking, but here is the most serious literal way. None of the individuals had a history of coronary heart disease or stroke at the start of the study, indicating the absence of cardiovascular ill health. However, those that abandoned regular siestas went on to suffer a 37% increased risk of death from heart disease across the 6-year period relative to those who maintained regular daytime naps. The effect was especially strong in working men, where the ensuing mortality risk of not napping increased by well over 60%. Is that insane? A 60% increase in stroke and heart attacks from not taking a nap. That's insane. I was astounded by that. I'm like, why don't we all just flip back, right? But we don't, as humans in this world and country, we don't necessarily react to long-term problems. We just live in the now for the most part. So it makes sense why we don't go back, but man, we sure should. So I'm not going to read these details that I've highlighted for autism, but they have found that infants have altered REM sleep patterns as opposed to typical REM sleep patterns in infants, and is highly correlated with autism. And so people with autism have more of a flattened out like melatonin spike, whereas for most people, it's this very sharp increase of melatonin, and then it quickly drops off. It only lasts like a couple hours in the night. And for autistic people, it's flattened out a bit. And then they don't have the typical patterns as he maps out in the book for REM sleep. And he dives into the significance of REM sleep and how it sort of organizes thoughts in the brain, and that feeling you have in your dream state that like 5 minutes is like an hour long, because it's literally slowed down. Like those brain waves are just a little bit slower, even though we're kind of remapping the events of the day and things we learned and stuff like that. And so people with autism also have altered NREM patterns. And so they're doing a lot of work with autism and REM sleep, trying to figure out if there are cures or ways to prevent that from early in life, right? Or even later. He mentions the effects of caffeine and alcohol on some of these things. So alcohol, I'll just give you a bit here. The newborns of heavy drinking mothers spent far less time in the active state of REM sleep compared with infants of similar age but who were born of mothers who did not drink during pregnancy. The recording electrodes went on to point out an even more concerning physiological story. Newborns of heavy drinking mothers did not have the same electrical quality of REM sleep. And as you know, in utero, the developing brain, that's a critical time in life. Like, a baby starts from a bundle of cells and basically just keeps growing and growing and develops a heart and a brain and all these vital organs at that time. And if they do not have the quality REM sleep to organize their brain and do all the things, many of which we don't even know what it does, that's a problem, right? Alcohol significantly reduced the amount of time that the unborn baby spent in REM sleep relative to the non-alcohol conditions. This is for people who just have a glass of wine, like not heavy drinkers, but just, mild, moderate drinkers. That alcohol also dampened the intensity of REM sleep experienced by the fetus, defined by the standard measures of how many darting rapid eye movements adorn the REM sleep cycle. Furthermore, these unborn infants suffered a depression in breathing during REM sleep, with breath rates dropping from a rate of 381 per hour during natural sleep to just 4 per hour when the fetus was exposed to alcohol. Hard to say what the effects of that is, but it's clearly having an effect. These infants went from a breath rate of 381 breaths per hour to just 4 breaths per hour. This is in your utero, so breathing is of course more of an exercise. But what effects might it have, right? All right, moving on. Sleep and adolescence. The changes in deep NREM sleep always precedes the cognitive and developmental milestones within the brain by several weeks or months, implying a direction of influence. Deep sleep may be a driving force of brain maturation, not the other way around. Feinberg made a second seminal discovery when he examined the timeline of changing deep sleep intensity at each different electrode spot on the head. It was not the same. Instead, the rise and fall pattern of maturation always began at the back of the brain, which performs the functions of visual and spatial perception, and then progressed steadily forward as adolescence progressed. Most striking, the very last stop on the maturational journey was the tip of the frontal lobe, which enables rational thinking and critical decision-making. Therefore, the back of the brain of an adolescent was more adult-like, while the front of the brain remained more childlike at any one moment during this developmental window of time. His findings helped explain why rationality is one of the last things to flourish in teenagers, as it is the last brain territory to receive sleep's maturational treatment. I thought that was very interesting. We all know that teenagers are irrational, rambunctious, crazy. They do stupid things. They put themselves in danger. They drive crazy. They are loud in public. They do things that are irrational and stupid a lot of times. And that's because the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of the brain, the rational thinking part of the brain gets the last dose of medicine, right? And so that's the last thing to be developed. And NREM sleep is the thing that triggers development. So how significant is NREM sleep? It's incredibly important. The quality of sleep we get is very, very important. Now, moving on with these teenagers, the circadian rhythm, which I think I explained, he goes into detail with this. A baby's circadian rhythm, it's a bit unstable, and they have a lot of wake sleep times. As you know, if you're a parent, I'm a parent of 4 and I don't sleep. My 4-year-old to be walking in any moment now. He's been asleep for a few hours. He always wakes up after like 3 hours of sleep, wants us to put him back to sleep, right? As people grow and mature, their circadian rhythm shrinks down to the point where we're basically sleeping about 8 hours. However, teenagers, their circadian rhythm gets moved way back. So while young kids and adults want to go to bed, earlier, around 10:30, 11, midnight, whatever that might be. Kids earlier than that. But 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they want to go to bed in the early morning. One hypothesis is that this is Mother Nature has perhaps helped adolescents unbuckle themselves from their parents, is to march their circadian rhythms forward in time, past that of their adult mothers and fathers. This ingenious biological solution selectively shifts teenagers to a later phase when they can for several hours operate independently and do so as a peer group collective. I thought that was really interesting. Maybe it's a practice for being independent, but not all the time, just for a short period there. Or my own thought was, for millions of years, it seems our human life expectancy was only about 40 years old anyway. And so at that time, maybe those young teenagers, that was the time to be getting married, having babies, things like that, because a 40-year lifespan was, that's not very long. And so teenagers would be the most vital parents. That was just a random thought that I had, which reminds me, there's actually this really cool video. I should put a link in here. I don't even know the name of it, but he takes the lifespan of people over time and the socioeconomic wealth of those countries. And it just has dots on a graph, but they're bigger or smaller based on the country's population size. And you've got life expectancy and then wealth. Those are the two things he's measuring. And I think he starts in the early 1800s or maybe earlier than that. And he goes forward, and life expectancy for all countries is very low, and we're poor, right? And then over time, a few of them start sprinkling out, and then they start shooting up in wealth. And then, of course, the US and Europe became really wealthy and healthy, and then other changes. And over time, at the end of the video, I think it ends in 2013 or 16 or so. At the time of the video, most countries had moved into a lifespan of over 70 years and quite wealthy. And it's continuing to move that way, which I thought was really cool. So anyway, side note here. I got off on a tangent there because of the life expectancy, but it's a cool video. You should look it up. Okay. I'm going to move into some really interesting stuff now. Sleep the night after learning. So lots of experiments being done to see if sleep would help us remember things better, right? And it certainly does. Some of these studies showed that, so the experimental result of Jenkins and Dallenbach have now been replicated time and time again, with a memory retention benefit of between 20 and 40% being offered by sleep compared to the same amount of time awake. So when people were given information and had to recall that information, people who had slept for 8 hours had a 40% greater retention than those who had not. The more deep NREM sleep, the more information an individual remembered the next day. Indeed, if you were a participant in such a study and the only information I had was the amount of deep NREM sleep you had obtained that night, I could predict with high accuracy how much you would remember in the upcoming memory test upon awakening, even before you took it. That's how deterministic the link between sleep and memory consolidation can be. I thought that was fascinating. I could just predict approximately what percentage of information you would recall based on the number of NREM sleep hours you got. Using MRI scans, we have since looked deep into the brain of participants to see where those memories are being retrieved from before sleep relative to after sleep. It turns out that those information packets were being recalled from very different geographical locations within the brain at the two different times. Before having slept, participants were fetching memories from the short-term storage site of the hippocampus, that temporary warehouse, which is a vulnerable place to live for any long duration of time if you are a new memory. But things look very different by the next morning. The memories had moved. After the full night of sleep, participants were now retrieving that same information from the neocortex, which sits at the top of the brain, a region that serves as long-term storage site of fact for fact-based memories, which they can now live safely, perhaps in perpetuity. So the geographical site in the brain where memories were stored moved after sleep. So they went from the neocortex from the hippocampus to the neocortex. And he also mentions that even memories that may have been deleted, forgotten memories shortly after memory of learning them, might actually be accessible after sleep. It's almost like a hard drive gets a bit of malware going on, and then there's this like recovery that goes on during sleep. So much of the brain seems to operate like a computer. Actually, it's like you have a chip in your hippocampus that can only hold so much, and then things start getting pushed out. And then each night you have to like upload that into your storage space where it's more organized in folders and separated out. And then you clean, it's like as if you cleaned out your hippocampus for more information. Very interesting that it changes locations in your brain during your sleep. Now, they have tried to do some experiments with boosting the quality of NREM sleep in individuals. They've done a few things that have shown more quality deep sleep, putting electrodes on parts of the brain and then like synchronizing those with your spindles, which has to be done in a lab, and you have to do it perfectly or it doesn't work. It actually can have a negative effect. So he says, don't try this at home, but they did successfully improve the deepest stage of NREM sleep. And by boosting those electrical pulses and quality of deep sleep brainwave activities, the researchers almost doubled the number of facts that individuals were able to recall the following day. So it's almost like a memory hack. Something wrong with my throat. I'm like barely getting through this. All right. I might be done choking to death, which I'm sure I'll cut out of the video, but this is where I started. What if a similar opportunity was possible with sleep and memory? Before going to bed, you would review the learning experiences of the day, selecting only those memories from the menu list that you would like to improve. You place your order, then go to sleep, knowing that your order will be served to you overnight. When you wake up in the morning, your brain will have been nourished only by the specific items you ordered from the autobiographical carte du jour. You have, as a consequence, selectively enhanced only those individual memories that you want to keep. It all sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but it is now science fact. The method is called targeted memory reactivation. And as is so often the case, the true story turns out to be far more fascinating than the fictional one. Does that blow your mind or what? So my takeaway from this is like, okay, in our planner, I'm going to plan my day. I'm going to do my to-dos. I'm going to check at the end of the day, did things go well? Did they not go well? Which things went well? And do I want to recalculate and calibrate and repeat the next day or next week? And I'm going to review those things. Also, as I spoke in the last book, Be Where Your Feet Are, how he has this gratitude moment where he basically takes time to do a gratitude journal. Well, my daughter and I do it together at night when I'm putting her to bed. And I just thought, man, like that's a hell of a good consequence. Like if I'm just reviewing at night the things I'm grateful for, and then the next morning, it's like sort of reinforced. My daughter and I wake up the next morning having basically more of these things in our lives of gratitude. The memories that we remember are positive ones. So anyway, you can, try and use this in various ways. Now, Mathew Walker, he and some grad students in his lab did a study to see if you could actually tell your brain to remember some things and forget other things. Now, like the example he gives is a student in a class professor's going over all these facts and information, and they're saying, remember this, it's going to be on the test. And then he's like, this is interesting, but it's not on the test. So you're kind of like, well, don't worry about that now. I just need to get the test, right? So it's like, remember, forget, remember, forget. And he actually does tests with people where he tells them to remember things or forget things. And then he has some of them sleep and some don't. And, and the ones that slept, the brain actually organized it that way. They remembered the things they were supposed to remember, and they forgot the things they didn't. But those who did not sleep didn't forget the things they were supposed to forget. And of course, there's short-term memory. But as you know from previously, they're more likely to forget all of it if they don't sleep. So it almost stays true to the command of your awake time, where you go, that's important, remember it. That was neat, but don't worry about it. It's not on the test. Your brain stays true to that command when you get sleep. I thought that was crazy. So the last bit I'm going to give you for this portion of the book review is on that topic of remembering and forgetting. They are now doing work to harness that or improve that remember, forget capability. He says, we are now exploring ways of harnessing this remarkably intelligent service of selective remembering and forgetting with painful or problematic memories. Right? He says, my real world hope is to develop accurate methods of selectively weakening or erasing certain memories from an individual's memory library when there is a confirmed clinical need, such as in a trauma, drug addiction, or substance abuse. So we're getting to some really cool clinical capabilities, at least working on it. And wouldn't that be great if someone who has, developed drug addiction associated with a traumatic childhood or even single event or whatever, and they're just having PTSD and all these things, and the way they cope is through drugs, and now they've got a drug addiction, and now they've got health problems. It's like, if we can start easing that pain or memory so it's not so present all the time, could they live a more normal life, a healthy life, and all because of our ability to use sleep to our advantage. So anyway, this is to be continued, but I highly recommend you go grab it. As always, I'll put a link in the description so you can purchase it from Amazon through that link if you would like the book. I have found it very intriguing so far. I'm excited to get some of the future sections read, which are getting into some more of the good stuff, the juicy stuff, where it's his work and recent work. So Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams by Mathew Walker. This is a New York Times bestseller, and highly recommend it. So thank you guys for listening. Please stay tuned, hit the subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell so that you get notified. If you appreciate this content, subscribe, share, help me grow this channel so that we can reach more people, share more books, and of course, do more work with those who are trying to build a better life. So thank you all for listening, and we'll hopefully see you on the next one.